This video was inspired by this book that I picked up last week. It's about Franz Kafka, and while I was reading it, I just kind of started thinking about the concept of why there's certain books that we can't get out of our head. And I was thinking about why that was specifically with his books. There's a simple reason to that. That's because all of his 3 novels that he wrote, he never finished. I guess we do have short stories like Metamorphosis, but his 3 novels that he did attempt to write, he never finished. So why are we drawn to these stories that don't really have an ending, and why do we keep talking about them? That's what I kind of wanted to do a little bit of research and explore and talk about today. And I don't know if it's just me, but I feel like unfinished books feel more alive than the ones that do end, because it's like we don't really ever get the satisfaction of closing the book. They just kind of linger in the back of your head. So today I'm going to work with this concept, and I've compiled a couple of examples that I find interesting where this phenomenon happens. And some of these novels were lost or abandoned or unfinished for a lot of odd reasons. I'm Vanessa, by the way. Nice to meet you, or welcome back if you've been on my channel, and a double welcome if you've been subscribed. I just reached a month on YouTube officially, which is super exciting because I've been thinking about starting this channel for a very long time, and I've been on TikTok for a while, but I feel like I just ramble too much to be captivating enough on that platform. So thank you for those of you who have stuck around. If it's your first time here, I make videos about books and writing and all things creative. So if that resonates with you, you might find this video to be interesting. I hope. It's interesting to me. This was very fun to research. If one person watches, I'm already happy. I'm already gonna watch this back when I edit it, so I'm entertaining myself here. Okay, so I have 3 books here that I'm gonna talk about today, and I'm categorizing them a little bit based on why they were unfinished. And this first category is probably the most obvious and also the most tragic, and that's works unfinished due to death, which to me also feels the most tragic because I'd like to believe that they would have finished them if it weren't for the author passing away. Except now that I think about it, I feel like this author probably wouldn't even have wanted to finish any of his books, and that's where we go back to Franz Kafka. So Franz Kafka had 3 novels that were never finished due to him passing away in 1924 at the very early age of 40. He got really ill and ultimately died because of tuberculosis. And so what we're left with are 0 finished novels and 3 unfinished works, their titles being The Castle, The Trial, and America, of which The Castle is my favorite, so I'm going to go more in depth into that one. But I think it also makes sense if I do, since this is also the very last novel that he worked on. And not only that, but it ends mid-sentence. I've written that sentence down so that I could read it to you guys, but warning, it is the very last line of the novel, and the very last line that I think that he's ever written. So if you're planning on reading it, you've been warned. This is definitely a spoiler. But here's what it says. She held out her trembling hand to Kay and had him sit down beside her. She spoke with great difficulty. It is hard to understand her, but what she said, and that's it. Yeah, that's literally the end of the book. He died shortly after this, and since he kind of knew that he was getting more sick over time, he asked his best friend Max Brod to burn all of his unpublished works and absolutely anything that he's ever written, because he wasn't sure if he even liked them, and at that point he didn't want anyone else to read them either. But to our benefit, Max didn't listen, and he went on to publish all of his incomplete novels. And of all these 3, it's The Castle that really stuck with me. It follows a man that we only get introduced to as K, like the letter K, and he moves into this small village looking for a job as a land surveyor, and he tries to get in touch with these mysterious authorities that control the village from a castle. So what follows from this premise is him just struggling through every step of the way, trying to get through these like weird obstacles and a lot of resistance that makes it seem like he's never gonna get to this distant, all-important castle. And we're kind of just left with that feeling at the end because there's no real resolution. And it ends with this man trying to reach this castle that seems like he's not allowed into. And on top of that, it stops in an incomplete journey mid-sentence. It's really fitting, though, to the story and to him as a person, as someone that contemplated a lot about how bureaucracy and how his own existence felt absurd, where I kind of imagine that his life might have felt like it ended in the same way. So this question of will he ever get to this castle, to me seems like he's asking, are my novels any good, or will they be accepted? Through all of this, though, he did tell his friend Max how he envisioned the novel should end, and I think that it fits my theory, because he told him that he wanted the protagonist to die in the village, and then only after he dies the village would accept him as a citizen, which I think that implies eventually he did get to the castle. I like to think that. I kind of also like to interpret it like he feels that he does have this lasting power as a writer, and deep down he kind of knows that his work has this potential to reach the level of acclaim that it has today. He just wouldn't live to see it. Alright, I'm just fixing this up because you guys deserve ambiance and I forgot to turn these on from the beginning of the video. 1 second. That's so cutie. Okay. Also, by the way, these are LED. I've had a lot of comments, which are kind of funny, but people are like, oh, you're gonna burn your whole house down because you have candles burning on top of books and the wax is falling onto them. No. These are plastic. They're from Hobby Lobby. But they're cute though, right? Okay, see, I knew something was missing. Now we're good. Now we could keep filming. I feel more comfortable now. It just didn't feel pretty enough, you know? This is pretty. Pretty. Okay, so next up we have a collection of works that we'll never get to read because they were taken away. And these works come from Ernest Hemingway, the very influential 20th century American writer and journalist. So when he was 23, he was living in Toronto at the time, and he was working for the Toronto Daily Star, which is a Canadian newspaper. And one day his wife Elizabeth wanted to travel out to see him, and she was in Paris at the time. So she packed up all of his writings because she knew how important it was for him to have all of his novels and notes and manuscripts with him. So she brought everything with her so that he could continue his novels and hopefully finish them in Canada. So she got to the train station. She was all ready to leave, and she decided to buy a bottle of Evian water, very specific. And she left the suitcase unattended, and it was stolen, obviously. And obviously she felt really guilty about this, and she would later say that she cried the entire ride, and even when she got there to tell him, she was still in tears over it. But he kind of laughed it off and comforted her, and he said that she shouldn't worry because he actually had copies of everything, so it was fine and nothing was lost. And so you're probably thinking, okay, well then these aren't lost works, then we could just read them. We have access to them then. But then she said the copies were also in that suitcase. And he went to Paris because he couldn't believe it and he wanted to see it for himself. And then he obviously saw that they were stolen. In my research into this, I did find that he claimed that the loss of this suitcase was the reason that he ultimately decided to divorce Elizabeth, where he admitted it after a night of heavy drinking. Which, if that's true, it's both understandable to be really distressed over losing your work, but also it just feels really harsh. And especially because she felt a lot of guilt for the mistake that she made. And he was only 23 at the time. And he wrote so much after this. And actually, it was only after losing the suitcase that it motivated him to pivot into novels instead of working for the news and just do more personal work, which now he's known for. But what he did lose that we'll never get to read are some short stories and an entire draft of a World War I novel, and a lot more that we don't know of. But to add to that, though, there is kind of a strange coincidence that happened later in his life where he himself decided to leave a novel unfinished, and that's The Garden of Eden. And if you haven't heard of his iceberg theory, it's a writing theory that he came up with to explain how he felt that every story's deeper meaning should be implied or hinted at instead of just giving the reader every answer. And I guess he kind of did that with this book. That, or he just wasn't really feeling it and he didn't want to finish it. I've heard some people say that it was simply that he didn't like where the story was heading and he abandoned it. But either way, though, we'll never really be sure. Okay, so I have one last example for you, and that is about a novel that mysteriously vanished. Or maybe not so mysteriously. It's by another one of my favorite authors, and that's Sylvia Plath. She has a lost work that we know a little bit about. We have a working title, and that's Double Exposure. It was supposed to be a fictionalized autobiography about an artist that finds out that her husband was cheating on her. But then the book went missing, or did it? In real life, her husband did have an affair, and it has been confirmed that he did burn at least one of her manuscripts at the time while they were married. And there's a lot of other speculations when it comes to him, but those are details that haven't been confirmed. Weirdly, though, we only know that this half novel existed because her husband actually wrote about it, and he mentioned that she had around 130 pages typed up, and then it disappeared around 1970. He never really gives any theories as to why it got lost or stolen or anything. It's just kind of like he accepted that it was gone and he was okay with it. And then after she passed away, he inherited all of her works because she didn't have a will. So that included a lot of her works that she's had since early childhood, which would have been great to have to create like a more holistic biography on her life that we would be able to reference today, but that disappeared too. Ted had a history of getting rid of her writing, where he admitted to destroying some of it because he didn't want her children to read it because of the content within it. But obviously that could have easily been an excuse because a lot of it he didn't end up actually reading himself. Obviously a lot of her fans are really upset over the loss, me included, because what even is that? Like, just imagine inheriting somebody's life work, someone's passion, and then deciding to destroy parts that you personally just didn't like. That is just terrible to me. So what's my point in saying all of this though? We know that we're never gonna get to read any of these books, but maybe there's something strangely beautiful in that. Especially with works that we do have snippets of, it's like we kind of have a chance to complete the story and just let our own imagination fill in the gaps. And in that way, I'd like to imagine that there's 1,000 different endings to Kafka's story of the castle, and every other story that we don't really have an official ending to. Sometimes it's the stories that aren't finished or lost or destroyed that also kind of become the ones that are remembered or studied the most. It kind of reminds me of the Library of Alexandria, because there's so much to theorize about or just imagine how many works that we're never going to get to read. And not just the ones that we already know were housed there, like works by Homer, but what if there was an author that was equally as great that we never got to discover, whose works were just destroyed before we got to it? So maybe that's the underlying point I'm trying to make here, that there's this lasting value of things that are left undone. Like, they're kind of floating and memorialized, not just as works of the past, but they seem kind of contemporary. Like with Sylvia Plath, her writing seems very, very new to me, that I always forget that it was written in the 60s and not a lot more recently. But I think that's part of the magic of unfinished works. They remain open and they can continue to be interpreted through generations. And in that, they kind of stay relevant and timeless and strangely alive pieces of media. And I guess to close on that note, I think there's a lot more to be said about the topic and a lot that I didn't cover. And not just when it comes to books, but like the thousands of films and music and art that exist out there as unfinished works or as lost media. It's really easy for me to get lost in doing research on just like random lost media, which is weird because if you think about it, it's not like the more that I look, the more I'll end up finding. But it almost feels like if you look hard enough, you could find some clues. So maybe I should rename this video Masterpieces That We Might Never Read, because there's always hope, right? It's like when you lose something at home and they say that it's kind of best for you to just wait and leave it until it turns up instead of going mad and trying to look all over the place for it. And maybe I should take that same advice, and I'm going to leave it at that today. I hope you enjoyed this exploration of unfinished works, and if you have any favorite lost media or works that fascinate you, please let me know in the comments. I'm always really interested in that type of stuff. And if you like this video, consider subscribing because I post every week, and I'm really excited about next week's topic. See you then.